Hi, I'm Jane, and together with Jodes, we are two proud feminists passionate about female empowerment. This podcast is our take on the real conversations, real issues, and real challenges we must stay focused on if we're going to inspire the next generation of female leaders, managers, and entrepreneurs to pick up the baton and continue the journey to equality. But be warned, there will be rants and the odd profanity, but mainly just lots of curious conversations, uplifting stories, great guests, and food for thought on the path we still have to travel. It is clear that our young girls need us to harness our gumption and to use our voices now to make the changes we all know need to happen. It's time to be a pioneer, not a passenger. To paraphrase the famous words of a female game changer, Hollywood's iconic Bette Davis, fasten your seatbelts. It's going to be a bumpy ride. Okay, welcome to Jane and Joe's on One, Series 3, Episode 3, and we are delighted to have our second guest on this series, Kate Dodd. And Kate is the head of Brook Graham, which is a D&I practice. She's also the legal director for Pinsent Masons, which is a global professional services firm. She knows an awful lot about the subject we're going to talk about, and we're delighted that she's joining us. So thank you, Kate. So we are in this series where we're talking about women and work. Does it? And my first question to you, Kate, is does it? Does it work for you?
It does. It does now. I have to say that my view of work for women is really trying to be very clear about what you want in different stages of your life. I think it's becoming a bit more like that for men, but for women, it has always been the case that we have to balance, those of us with children have to balance work, family, childcare. And one thing I've really learned is that you can't have it all the time. So for me, my career has ebbed and flowed. I've always worked full time. I've always had a very big job by most people's standards. But in terms of my own ambition, in terms of progression, I've had to take a pause. I've had deliberate pauses. I've had pauses, unintended pauses through things like IVF and miscarriages. But for me, I'm currently enjoying working hard, and I feel like I'm really going places.
Fantastic, and you certainly are, I can confirm that. So today on this episode, a bit of a controversial subject, I imagine we're going to create lots of questions for lots of people, which is good because we're all about talking to real women about the real issues, and I think this is one of them. So my question is, has parking the gender agenda within the wider D&I programme helped or hindered the cause to achieve gender parity? So I don't want you to answer that straight away. It's not a yes or no question, unfortunately, is it? So let's just kind of dig into that a little bit more. So my first question is, does denying women their own space and their own network silence them?
Yes, I think is the short answer for that. Thankfully, I've not seen it happening that much, but I'm sure we'll come on to talk about kind of how D&I networks, employee affinity groups, etc., have changed recently. But I would definitely say that all workplaces need to find space for women and for other groups. But we're talking about women today, to have a safe place to talk about their experiences, their shared experiences, their individual experiences, and that is a really crucial part of creating an inclusive culture within a workplace.
Yeah, and their challenges. I mean, both Jodes and I work with women and have worked with women for a long time, and I've seen a lot of this happening where women feel that even though they're a majority group, they feel very marginalized still. And when you take away their space and their freedom to speak like safely without anybody questioning them, and you allow other groups to have their say but not them, well, then you're definitely silencing them. So I've known lots of companies that have got rid of the women's network but not got rid of the LGBT network. So it's like, well, why would you do that? Why is it okay for the LGBT network to have a space and not women? So you're not treating women in the same way, are you? So I've seen a lot of that happen over, I would say, the past 5 years. I've seen a lot of women's networks disappear. disappear. I've seen the budgets for women's networks disappear. I mean, we were talking about this the other day. You know, we are constantly looking for women to step up and be big sisters in Girls Out Loud. It's like, where do you find them? Because there aren't these networks anymore. You know, you can't go to these places to talk to women. They are very, very few and far between. And so taking that away has got to have a negative effect, hasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I have to say I'm very glad that I haven't seen that happening. We work with obviously a lot of businesses to help them advance their diversity and inclusion agenda. You might say the fact that these businesses are choosing to work with us shows that they're probably not the kind of business who is removing their women's network. But I haven't seen it happening. I have seen some businesses where they have really focused away from having individual network groups, but that would apply equally to an LGBT network as it would to a women's network, for example. And of course, the fact is that there are women in the LGBT network. Absolutely. And you know, because obviously there's intersectionality comes into this as well. So I have seen some businesses taking more of a blended approach. So they might have an overarching diversity network, and under those there would be a number of focus areas, one of which would be gender. And there are some advantages to that in terms of making sure that it almost avoids duplication of effort. It means that everybody is working to the same strategy and they're aware of what each of them are doing, and it does allow for more intersectionality. Let's say if you've got a lesbian woman who can then feel represented within the women's network and also the LGBT network. But you do have to be quite careful, because of course the disadvantages are that perhaps women don't have as much opportunity to share openly around lived experiences, etc. And also some strands might take priority over gender and leave them silenced. But what I would, if you are going to move to having one network, then I would very much say that you have to ensure that you still have those separate pillars, because simply getting rid of all of your networks and simply having one group that is meant to represent everybody, I think is completely ineffective. And unless you're a very small employer, so let's say, I don't know, less than 50 people, whereby you just haven't got enough individuals who are enthusiastic and are willing to put the work in, then I would say that you should always try and ensure that you've got separate safe spaces for people to talk about particular diversity issues.
And this, you mentioned this intersectionality, which really fascinates me, because it's like, you know, how people choose to identify. So we talk about, you know, a lesbian. So I'm a lesbian, should I be in the LGBT group? Well, I mean, I know lots of lesbians who would say to me, I'm a woman before I'm a lesbian. So I want a woman's network. Yeah. You know, so it's like, and you know, I'm like a black woman, for instance. You know, I'm female and I'm black, so I'd like to have a black woman's network, because I feel like sometimes when I go to these networks, there are white women.
Yes, yeah, and we have heard that a lot, that some, you know, women's networks can be very predominantly white. They can often be predominantly quite senior, quite privileged women who are talking in them. So there could be issues around voices not being heard, black women, you know, brown women feeling unrepresented, younger women feeling unrepresented. But the fact of the matter is that allowing people to, as you say, to identify with what they feel the most strongly is the best thing to do. And then if you are a sufficiently large employer, having a black women's network is amazing, you know, and it might be a subgroup of another network. So we've got a working families network within Pinsent Masons, and we also have a subset of that of working fathers, recognizing that the issues that they face are different to the issues that working mothers face, for example.
Yeah, that's fab. That's fab. But as a big company, you know, you can do that and lead the way, can't you? And that's amazing. I've never heard of a father's network. So that is,
and I think awesome. One other challenge that it kind of presents, you know, even with all the good intent of trying to, you know, even if you bring them all into one network, but still, you know, allow them the spaces to have the conversations about the lived experiences they want to have. I think what gets overlooked a little bit in some of these situations is then, you know, the requirement for the resources to do that. And when I say resources, I'm talking about, you know, the time and energy and who the people are who have to run these things, because quite often, and I'm speaking on behalf of all of these groups now, not just the women's one, even though that's what brings us to the table. It's a, you know, it's an extracurricular activity, often, isn't it, alongside a very big day job for people.
And we tell our clients, you cannot expect a successful network to be run off the side of somebody's desk. So, for example, if you've got lawyers, like we are at Pinsent Masons, you know, then there needs to be an adjustment in somebody's targets. For example, you know, if you're expecting somebody to do something that's significant, then they need to have, that needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be rewarded. It needs to be noted in appraisals. It needs to be something that is bonused, all of these types of things, so that people aren't expected to do this for the good of their health, basically. And what we see is that companies who fail to make progress on diversity and inclusion, all aspects of diversity and inclusion, are those companies where people are being expected to do it off the side of their desk. Because how can you possibly prioritize that when your bonus, your salary, your, you know, your appraisal rating, everything else focuses on your day job? You know, why therefore would you ever prioritize trying to get a women's network up off, or a you know, an LGBT network, or whatever else it is you're doing?
And you need the support to do that, in terms of, am I doing it the right way as well, don't you? You need the training on
the governance.
On, absolutely. You know, otherwise you're walking on eggshells, aren't you?
You are. And one of the things that we run is governance. So we help companies set up network groups. You shouldn't be doing this by chance. There needs to be a strategy, all the rest of it. Funding. You need to be very clear at the outset how much funding, but so funding in terms of actual money, but then also, as Jode says, funding in terms of time, the amount, you know, the resource that you're giving to those groups.
And the types of things that each group want, because they don't all need the same, do they? They want and need different things. You know, I guess I spent many years doing like going into businesses to do sessions for it was a women's network, there were women's networks, but they were very skills-based development sessions. They were like, can you come and help us with our influencing skills? Can you come and help us be a little bit more assertive? Can you help us develop our credibility in these situations? And actually what I find is that, you know, other groups may want different things to help them with their development, or how they advance, or how they get represented. So it's really easy for it all to get diluted, isn't it, when it's in one. So it's just a watch out, I think, isn't it, is to remember that it needs a bit more investment if it's going to all sit under one D&I kind of network.
Absolutely. And I would never encourage a business to have one diversity network. You know, I know that was the kind of the movement. I know it was quite popular. Some of our clients did move to that and have since moved away from it, or at least the separate strands have become networks again in their own right.
We considered it. You can see why. You can see why they might think it'd be a good
idea.
move.
But well, one of the benefits is that actually, and one of the things that we found at Pinsent Masons is actually that people want to be an ally, and they find it too much to try and be an ally of every single network. You know, how can I be an LGBT ally and also a women's ally, and also disability ally, and a race and ethnicity ally? So what we did at Pinsent is we kept all of our separate networks, but we also created a new network called the Inclusion Allies Network. And that was for people who didn't necessarily identify into any of the particular network groups, but they wanted to be an ally for everybody. Exactly. So, and even if it's just things like being a member of that Inclusion Allies Network means that you get invited to all the events. So it means that you're going to get invited to every single event that's put on. You don't need to be a member of all of those separate networks, but it means that you can always educate yourself and avail yourself of these interesting opportunities and this allyship. And I think that's a really powerful thing for an organisation to do, is to allow allyship.
Can I be in that? I'd like to be in that.
That
sounds great. I want to be in it.
So, you know, if we just go back to the bigger picture piece around, obviously we've been banging the gender parity drum for quite some time. And obviously I think there's quite a number of views around on particularly how COVID has affected our progress on some of that. So what's your view on you know, the progress around gender parity and how long you might think it's going to take for us to get there, considering some of this?
I don't think it'll happen in my lifetime,
No,
and I'm
either.
45, so I have to say that I'm not wildly positive around gender parity. I think it is changing. I think we were definitely set back by COVID, and mainly because of the caring aspects of life. Now, I talk a lot about the unpaid caring tariff. I constantly tell my husband how much that I do and how little he does, to the point where it was my daughter's 8th birthday yesterday, and I asked him if he could name a single present that was wrapped on the bed, which of course he couldn't. So I took great joy in pointing out that to him. And I know that's a really flippant kind of example, but it's true. And during COVID, a lot of women ended up doing the homeschooling as well as, or you know, the caring as well as trying to work, and that had a huge impact on people. And I think we're still coming out the other side of that. Also, I think the cost of living crisis is really, really bad for gender equality, because what I have seen in my own networks and also in the employment advice I'm asked to give is women having to give up paid childcare because they cannot afford it, and they're trying to basically work and care, and it's impossible.
So how do we change that? What do we need to do?
Well, I mean, from a government perspective, we need to properly fund childcare. I mean, I've talked a lot about this. We sponsored the Working Families report, which was really horrendously depressing, about the effect of the kind of defunding of childcare on women, particularly lower families, and Black women are very impacted by this. So we need to fund better childcare. We also need to encourage dads to step up and to take more responsibility. And the best way to do that is to fund time off for men. So at our firm, we have got equal family leave provisions for men and women. So, you know, the men can take, you know, full paternity leave. Shared parental leave is obviously the right word for it, but as old people remember it being called paternity leave. So only by funding men to have time off will you ever create gender equality. And of course, we don't really see the benefit of this ourselves, because we don't have many men and women who are in couples working for us, unfortunately. But what we do know is that we're allowing a woman in another workplace, or another man, you know, I'm not saying, obviously there's all sorts of different kinds of relationships, but we're allowing the person who maybe primarily would be the carer in ordinary circumstances to be able to go back to work, because their partner, the male who is working for us, can have paid time off. So have properly paid leave to therefore be an equal partnership.
And do they take that leave, Kate? I mean, you're offering it. Do they take it?
It's
how many of them are taking it?
It's really growing massively, and I think this is a generational thing. And I do have hope for my children's generation, because I'm seeing younger men. So I'm talking about men in their 20s, their 30s, taking this up far more than older men of my generation. And those men are going part-time, they're coming back, flexible working, they are leaving on time, they are present. I would hope that they would know what gifts their children are having for their 8th birthday. They might not do.
Or they might buy some of them.
Possibly. I mean, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that be incredible?
Yeah.
It was funny yesterday. I was with a construction firm yesterday, and I had a team of 6 directors together. They were all men.
Surprise.
But they're a great crowd, actually. I'm enjoying doing some work with them. But actually, the conversation did come up yesterday about how COVID shone a light on the fact that they had been working just so hard. They said they've been working so hard. They've been focused so much on work, and that their wife, and for all of them, it was their wife, you know, did all of the caretaking. But COVID actually opened their eyes to how much they'd missed, and that now they were starting to think a bit more about how they might want a little bit more of that in their life. So
that's a brilliant point, because I do think that, and that's probably the other thing that's going on for us at work, is that a load of these men had their babies, you know, with their wives or their girlfriends or their husbands or whoever in COVID. So they were at home. And they saw how amazing it is and how magical it is, and they don't want to come back into work in the same way.
But there's actually quite a bit of peer pressure to some of them doing that. You know, you've got a very mixed group of blokes in a construction company. You know, it's very typical, as you would expect at the moment, that they are a business that's working hard to sort that out. However, you know, they do experience a bit of peer pressure to that of, oh, you know, what do you want to go and do that for?
Are you only right under the thumb there, aren't you?
Sorry about me.
Rubbish
man voice.
Yeah, leave your testicles in a jar by the front door.
Yeah, all that kind of stuff.
Well, it was interesting because one of our clients said to us, do you think that offices are becoming kind of man dens or man caves because so many women are choosing to work from home more often, and therefore there's far more men in the office? Now, I mean, I'm in the office majority of my time, and I would say that there's a real mixture of men and women here. But I can imagine that there are some workplaces that are becoming men caves, man caves, and the risk of this to gender equality is all really driven around affinity bias and also proximity bias. So I will give the advantages to the person who's closest to me because I'm lazy.
The one that goes up, the one that sits next to me.
They're next to me, and I mean, I do it all the time personally, but also I now know that person a lot better. So I like them more. So I am going to stick up for them, and I am going to advocate for them, and I'm going to sponsor them, and I'm going to do all these other things that for my other team member who sits at home, I'm much less likely to do.
Yeah, it's dangerous, isn't it? We've got to get back in the office. It is quite dangerous, really. So there's also an issue about how we raise boys there, but that's probably another podcast altogether, isn't it? In terms of trying to support the men to change. It's like, you know, should we raise them differently from day one? And we could talk all afternoon about that. So next question. What do you think that women want from work? And does this differ from what men want?
I think that women want a balance, basically. I think most women want a career, and women want to be independent. And I don't mean that in a kind of Beyonce way. I mean that women do genuinely want to be fulfilled and enjoy their career. You know, most of my generation grew up with working mums. You know, I'm my mid-40s, but you know, most of my friends' mums worked, and nowadays I'd say, you know, I don't really know anyone who doesn't work. I know a few people, but I would say they were kind of the lucky few, as it were. But then when you talk to most people, they wouldn't want to be at home all the time. So I think women want to work. I think women want the balance, and I think that's always been the case. Is that we're so aware of the pressure on our children. I've got, you know, teen and a younger one. You need to be there for them. You need to help them navigate this kind of scary world out there, which is what Girls Out Loud's all about. And we know that those girls and boys need parents who are present. So I think that what women want hasn't changed. I think what men want is changing, and I think that's where the crucial change will come for gender parity, is that more men want that balance. As we were just saying, they've seen how good it is to be at home and to be present at bath time and bedtime and be at sports day, and that men are looking for a better balance.
Okay. So that leads on to our last question, which is about this term good men, which we were debating earlier. So, you know, how do we engage and harness the good men?
So I don't think we should use the phrase good men, because I think it therefore kind of suggests there is good men and there's bad men. And of course, all of us, there's no good women and bad women either. All of us are on the spectrum of good to bad. What we really mean, I think what you meant by that question is, how do we encourage and teach men to be good allies, and how do we encourage them to be good colleagues? And I think the way to do that is to educate and to empower them and to equip them, basically. I say educate, I don't mean that in a patronizing way, but a lot of men and women have no idea of the impact of the words that they use or the practices they use. So, you know, you can be sitting in a meeting with somebody who you know is really fun and really nice and great to get along with, but they will constantly kind of be chatting almost out the side of their mouth and the man sat next to them making in-joke references, or, you know, talking about golf or whatever else it is. And it has the effect, probably not the purpose, but it has the effect of excluding others in the room, often women. And I think it's about, therefore, the education process of just helping people to recognize what they're doing and understand it, but also really proactively talking to men about what allyship looks like, and not performative allyship. I don't mean men who go, oh, you know, I would cross the street if I was walking home behind a woman because she might feel unsafe with me standing behind her. Great, okay, fine, but that's not going to make any sort of difference to gender equality at work.
So in your experience, are men open to that then? When you talk about, you know, men need to be educated or empowered, the thought of talking to a man about empowering him is quite an interesting concept. You know, so are they open to that, or is this your language to us, but you would put it differently to them?
I don't know if I would. It's a really good question, Jane. I think that saying to men that we want to empower you to be allies is an encouraging thing. Empowerment does feel quite female, but I think the problem is that, one of the problems that we've probably dropped into as a society is we empower women and we tell men off. Or, you know, we encourage, we lift some up, and that there is a feeling that by lifting someone else up, someone else is getting crushed down. And I think that the whole thing around toxic masculinity and the rise of these, and I'm not going to even dignify him by using his name, but the rise of these influencers who are trying to encourage young men into thinking that there is no place for them in society. It comes because there's this idea that to encourage and to uplift and empower one group necessarily means stamping and crushing another group. And therefore, no, it doesn't. Like, if we raise everybody up, then we are a better society for that.
Absolutely.
So we need to get away from this idea of the seesaw, basically, of, you know, you go up, I go down. And I think talking to men and encouraging them to use their power to lift others up is a really powerful way to do that. And I don't think it's patronizing. And I also think that it encourages men to feel that they're being addressed in the same way that they've heard women as being addressed for the last decade.
Okay. Perfect place to just put a peg in.
So Kate, it's been really interesting talking to you, actually, but we always finish every episode kind of consolidating our conversation with obviously the majority of our listeners are women, like the three of us and similar, and they're normally at home or on their commute to work thinking, well, what can I do about this? You know, whether some of their experience is similar to the ones we've described, whether they're a little bit different. But if they're sitting there thinking, actually, you know, I want to do something, I want to contribute to this whole piece around where gender now sits in the D&I space for parity, what would be your recommendations to those people to say, what could they do?
Yeah, I would say 2 words is get involved.
Get involved.
So there might be younger women who don't necessarily have power, and those individuals should be getting involved in the female networks, in any of the networks that are available. They should be giving of their time. So the more senior you get, the less time you have. So, you know, if there is some side of the death stuff to be done, I would say to the women, get involved, become a big sister. Obviously, I'm always going to say that because I feel very passionately about Girls Out Loud. To the more senior women, I would say get involved. You know, get involved in a different way. Use your voice, use your power to advocate for others. Encourage the women in your team to get involved. There's 3 people in my team, and it's a small team, and we've got 3 big sisters in it, and I'm in big trouble because productivity for us is, you know, it can be challenging. But I've used my power and my voice to encourage others to get involved. And I think that it's not just about that, but also recognizing in ourselves, are we doing everything we can? Are we clear that we're not one of those women who climbs the ladder and then pulls it up after us? Because actually, do you know what? I had a really hard time climbing the ladder. So why should these younger women have it easier than me? So I think getting involved and using, whether it's time, resource, power, whatever you've got, use that in order to drive change.
Amazing.
Fantastic.
Well, that's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. Find your voice.
And lo and behold, what does it bring us back to, like every other episode?
Sisterhood.
And Girls Out Loud.
And Girls Out Loud. Yeah. Girls Out Loud and sisterhood. Every single episode we do, it's like, you know, as women, we need to support each other. You know, we need to call it out. We need to get involved. We need to find our voice. We need to use our voice. You know, it's always the same solution. always, whatever we're talking about.
Yeah, maybe in a different context, but always in there.
Always in the same. So, Kate, thank you so much. It's
Pleasure.
been a delight having you on the podcast, and thank you for your time and your wisdom. And as usual, you're fascinating to talk to. You know so much about your subject. So you were the one person we wanted to come on to talk about this. So thank you so much.
Oh, thanks very much for having me.
Pleasure.
Right, and we will see you all next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Until then,
bye.
Bye. You have been listening to Jane and Jodes on One. Until next time, remember, sisterhood matters. Together, we are bold, brave, fierce, and unstoppable.